Ever wonder why your plane feels instantly heavier during a steep turn? I mean, you're flying along, you roll into a tight bank, and suddenly, bam, you feel that undeniable seat-of-the-pants pressure just pushing you down. It's a very real, very physical sensation. And honestly, understanding the actual science behind it, it's absolutely crucial for your safety in the sky.
Welcome to the Explainer. So if you're a PPL student gearing up for that ground exam, you are exactly where you need to be. Today, we're taking the sometimes kind of dense aerodynamics of load factors and translating them into clear, easy-to-remember concepts that you're absolutely going to see on your test. All right, let's jump right in. We'll be covering four main things today: defining load factor, aircraft categories, the physics of steep turns, and accelerated stalls. Section 1. Defining load factor. So we need to put a name to that invisible force messing with your aircraft structure. Basically, load factor is the ratio of the maximum load an airplane can sustain compared to its gross weight. And we measure this in G's, which just stands for the acceleration of gravity. Essentially, anytime you deflect your plane from straight and level flight, you're putting stress on the airframe. The amount of that force, that's your load factor. So simply put, it's how many times the force of gravity is currently acting on your plane. Let's look at the number 3 to really ground this concept. Say you pull up sharply from a dive and hit a load factor of 3 Gs. What does that actually mean? Well, it means the total load on the airframe is exactly 3 times its gross weight. And for you, sitting there in the left seat, you're literally being pressed down with a force equal to 3 times your own body weight. Crazy, right? Section 2. Aircraft categories and limits. Airplanes are tough, but they aren't indestructible, so engineers have to draw some hard lines in the sand. These are your limit load factors, and trust me, you'll want to memorize these for the exam. For the normal category, the limit is 3.8 Gs. Utility category, which lets you do mild acrobatics like spins, bumps up to 4.4 Gs. And for fully aerobatic aircraft, it maxes out at 6.0 Gs. The logic here makes total sense, right? Normal, straight and level flying just requires way less structural beefiness than pulling intense aerobatic maneuvers. Now, engineers are smart, so they build in a buffer. It's exactly 1.5. This is what we call the factor of safety. Aviation regs require that a plane's structure can support 1.5 times its limit load factor without suffering catastrophic failure. But listen, if you actually hit that 1.5 buffer, parts of the plane might permanently bend or warp. You're definitely doing structural damage even if the wings don't instantly snap off. It's a reserve for wild, unexpected conditions. Definitely not a free pass to abuse the airplane. Section 3. The physics of steep turns. Okay, here is where load factors become a very real, everyday flying concern. When you're in a constant altitude, coordinated turn, load factor is basically the result of centrifugal force and gravity working together. And look how fast that G load scales up. At 0 degrees of bank, you're chilling at a standard 1 G. But roll into a 60-degree bank, and boom, your load factor is exactly 2 Gs. Highlight that, circle it, whatever you gotta do. A 60-degree bank equals 2 Gs. The FAA absolutely loves putting that on the written exam. And notice how extreme things get if you keep pushing it. At an 80-degree bank, you're experiencing a massive 5.76 Gs. Which actually leads us to a pretty mind-blowing aerodynamic reality. Maintaining a constant altitude in a 90-degree banked turn, it's mathematically impossible in coordinated flight. As you roll closer to that 90-degree mark, the required load factor basically shoots straight up toward infinity. Your wings just physically cannot generate enough lift to counteract that massive load while holding altitude, unless you transition into a slipping, straight knife-edge flight. But hey, that's a whole different maneuver. So before we dive into the heavier math of our final section, a quick question for you. Why do airplanes make terrible comedians? Well, because their jokes always stall under pressure. All right, groan if you want to, but take a quick breath and let your brain reset for a second. We really need to talk about what happens when aerodynamic pressure actually does force a stall. Section 4. Accelerated stalling speeds. This right here is the absolute most critical consequence of high load factors. A high load factor doesn't just bend metal, it completely changes how your wing flies. If you increase the load factor, your stall speed increases. And it's not just a random increase either. The golden rule is that stalling speed increases in proportion to the square root of the load factor. This is exactly why a stall can sneak up on you and happen at what looks like a totally safe airspeed on your dial. Let's actually walk through how this builds, using the exact kind of textbook math you're going to face on the exam. Imagine your normal, unaccelerated 1G stall speed is 50 knots.
If you suddenly pull 4 Gs in a steep maneuver, well, the square root of 4 is 2. Multiply 50 knots by 2, and suddenly your new stall speed is a staggering 100 knots. Or, if your normal stall is 60 knots and you induce a 2.89 G load, the square root of 2.89 is 127. Multiply 60 by 1.7, and your wing now stalls at 102 knots. The danger zone creeps up incredibly fast.
Because of this massive danger, we have a vital airspeed limitation called VA, or Design Maneuvering Speed. Basically, this is the absolute maximum speed at which you can safely stall an aircraft without doing structural damage. The rule of thumb, if you're flying below VA and rip back hard on the yoke, the plane will aerodynamically stall before it physically breaks. But if you're flying above VA and yank the yoke, the structure is going to break before it ever stalls. And just a quick note, in a lot of older general aviation planes, VA is roughly calculated as 1.7 times your normal stalling speed.
Let's bring this back to the real world and summarize the hazards. You've got to keep these extreme danger zones in your head. The actual structural yield factor, the bending point, for your average light plane happens at a bank of around 70 to 75 degrees. Your stalling speed jumps by a full 50% at just a 63-degree bank. And here's the really scary one, a super common accident scenario. Abruptly pulling back on the elevator near the ground. If you panic and yank that yoke back, you immediately spike the G-load, skyrocket your stall speed, and you can stall the plane with literally no altitude left to recover. All right, let's do a rapid-fire review of the major takeaways you absolutely need to nail for the multiple-choice ground exam. Remember, load factor is measured in Gs. A 60-degree level bank produces exactly 2 Gs. Your stall speed rises with the square root of the G-load, and always respect your VA limits so your wing stalls before your airframe bends. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. When you're out there practicing your maneuvers, are you truly respecting your plane's structural limits, or are you just sort of guessing? Knowing the math doesn't just help you pass a test. It makes you a much safer, vastly more confident pilot in command. If this explainer helped you lock down these concepts for your exam, please like and subscribe for more ground school explainers. Catch you next time.